Alright, so hopefully you've downloaded Visual Studio successfully and now you have it on your desktop. So go ahead and open up Visual Studio and you're presented with the Visual Studio layout. To create a new project, go ahead and click File, New, and Project. Now you're going to see over to the left Visual C++. Make sure that's what's selected, and of these three options here in the middle, select Empty Project. Now you can choose your location. In my case, I created a folder on the desktop called C++ Tutorials. I'm going to select this folder and I'm going to call this Tutorial 1. Go ahead and click OK, and Visual Studio will generate a brand new project file for you. Now there isn't anything in it yet. We're going to create those files ourselves. To do so, over here to the right you'll see something called Solution Explorer, and right here, Tutorial 1, this is actually our project. So if we right click and come down to Add and select New Item, we're going to be presented with three options. We wish to create a .cpp file. This is also known as a source file. The .h file is known as a header file. Visual C++ files are different. These are usually used for creating graphical user interfaces. So we're going to create a source file, and it's going to be named automatically source.cpp. If we wanted, we could change this to some other name, but for this project, let's go ahead and leave it as source.cpp and click Add. This is our blank source file. Now you'll notice that because we created source.cpp, we can go over here to the Solution Explorer, and under source files we can see our source file source.cpp. So as we create more source files, they're going to be added to this folder called source files. Now, how do we compile and run a source file? One way to compile a source file is to come over to the project name, in our case Tutorial 1, and right click and click on Build. Now, we don't have anything in our source file to compile. So what happens if we compile an empty project? Go ahead and click Build. Down here in the output, we saw some messages such as build started, etc. And then we got an error list, and it told us an error with a code and a description. Now the description says entry point must be defined. In other words, the compiler was searching for an entry point in our code and it never actually found one. For this reason, we need an entry point. In fact, all C++ programs need an entry point, and in C++ programs, that entry point is known as the main function. Now, functions are an idea in coding that we have not yet covered, but in order to write our first actual C++ code, we need to use a function, and that's because a main function is required for all C++ programs. So let's create our main function. To do so, type the following: int main parentheses, hit enter, and do an opening curly brace. And you'll see that Visual Studio automatically closes it with another curly brace. If we hit enter, you'll see that it indents it for us, and this is just to make things look more orderly for us, because the compiler actually ignores all empty spaces. So you can have as many blank lines or empty spaces as you like without affecting the code. Now this is our main function, and for now just think of this as the entry point for our program. Anything inside these curly braces will execute, in other words, will compile to some executable instructions for the computer, and it always starts at the first line inside of the main function. Now for our first code, we're going to want to print some text to the screen. In order to do that, we need to take advantage of some code that's already built into the C++ programming language, and this code is incorporated into something called the C++ Standard Library. The C++ Standard Library is a collection of C++ code that we can take advantage of so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. In order to print text to our screen, we need to include a file called IOStream. IO stands for input-output, and stream is talking about streams of data that we're sending to our screen or some other output stream and receiving from some input stream. To include a file into our code, we use the pound sign with the include keyword. Now, in order to include a file from the standard library, we use pointy brackets, and the file that we wish to include is called IOStream. With this line of code, include IOStream, we're actually taking the code in the file IOStream, including it into our file. So all code in IOStream is accessible now inside of our file. Now, how do we print text to the screen? There's capabilities programmed into IOStream just for that. One such capability is called cout. Now, in order to use the cout command, type the following: std : cout, followed by double pointy brackets, and then we're going to type a string of characters in double quotes. Type the words "you died." Follow this by a backslash and the lowercase letter n, and then after the double quotes, type a semicolon. Now what this line does is prints the text "you died" to the screen, and the /n is known as a new line character. What it does is after printing the text "you died" to the screen, a new line is started. Go ahead and hit enter a couple times and now type the command system parentheses double quotes pause. Outside of the closing parentheses, go ahead and type a semicolon. A semicolon is sort of like a period at the end of a sentence for C++ code. It essentially tells the compiler that we have finished with this statement. A statement is really just a string of characters that means something to the C++ programming language, and statements get executed one at a time. So this line is a statement as well as this line. Go ahead and click on the Save Source.cpp button, and now we have successfully saved our file. We need to compile this code and then run it in order to see if it works. So head over to Tutorial 1 under Solution Explorer, right-click, and click on Build. Down here in the output, you'll see some messages. Build started means that the compilation process has begun. Down here, we'll see that 1 succeeded, 0 failed, 0 up to date, and 0 skipped. This typically means that our compilation was a success and no errors were encountered. Now, how do we run our program? Up here under Debug, if we click, we'll see Start Debugging and Start Without Debugging. Now, debugging is a feature in Visual Studio, and since we're not going to be talking about debugging in this video, we're going to choose Start Without Debugging. Notice the hotkey for this option is Control F5. We may wish to use that in the future to save some time. So click Start Without Debugging, and here we get a command window with the words "you died" printed to the screen, followed by press any key to continue. So go ahead and hit the Enter key or any other key, and you'll see that the window closed. The reason the window stayed open is because of the system pause command. If we were to highlight system pause and delete it, then click Save, head over to Tutorial 1, click Build, wait for it to compile, then click Debug and Start Without Debugging to run the program, you'll see that the window pops up and then closes on its own. So we need this system pause command in order to pause the code at this line so that the program doesn't actually realize it's finished running yet because we've paused the system. So this is our first program and our first game, a game in which you died, so you can't really win this game, but we've covered one important milestone, and that's how to print text to the screen.